interest rates option. Interest rate option gives the holder the right but not the obligation to either pay or receive interest on a notional amount of money for a given period. Interest rates option guarantees a minimum or maximum rate of interest. This rate is called the strike price. The rate is called the strike price. For your option contracts, you have the strike price and also you have the futures price and also the spot rate. For the interest rate option, it is the option to buy futures. Interest rate option is option to buy futures. Let me write that here. Option to buy futures. It is the option to buy futures. That means the futures contracts cannot be separated from the option contracts. And you have the buyer also, and you have the seller of the option. For the interest rate option, if the strike price is favorable on the exercise date, the holder exercises. If not, the option will lapse. That means the holder of the option cannot make a loss. You can only make a gain, or you allow the option to lapse. Note, interest rate option is the right to sell or buy futures. As I said, it's the right to sell or buy futures. So the option contract is dependent on the future price. The option contract is dependent on the future price. So it is the future price that will determine if the option should be exercised or if the option should be allowed to lapse. So there are two basic types of option as it relates to the interest rates, just the way it is in the currency option. So for interest rate option, there are two basic types of option, the call option and the put option. The call option and the put option. So the call option, simply put, is the option to buy, futures. So it gives the holder the right but not the obligation to buy futures at the strike price or to receive interest on the exercise date at the implied interest rates. The put option, on the other hand, gives the holder the right but not the obligation to sell futures. So to sell futures. So anytime a company is selling futures, it is what? A put option. Anytime a company is buying futures under the option contract, it is a call option. In the call option or the option contract, whether the call or the put option, the holder is not expected to make a loss. Therefore, the option contract comes with a cost, and that cost is known as the premium. The premium is the cost for arranging the contract. So the premium is paid upfront. The premium is a payable. So you have for your if the transaction is a payable, that means you will add premium because the premium is also a payable. But if the company is expecting to receive, if the contract is count receivable, then you will less premium because premium is a payable. So for a receivable, the premium will reduce the net amount the company will receive on the transaction date, while for a payable, the option, the premium will increase the amount the company will need to make the payments. So you have a note here. In option contracts, the opening futures price is not needed for the calculation of profit or loss. It will only be needed to calculate your basis. So remember, for your currency option, you have the strike price and you have the closing spot rates. So for the currency futures, you basically will be comparing the strike price with the closing spot rates to determine profit or loss. To determine profit rather, because you cannot make a loss in the option contracts. For the futures contracts, to determine whether the futures should be exercised or not, there are two things that are needed, which is one, the strike price. And we said it is option to buy futures, and the option contract dependent on the futures price. So you will be comparing the strike price and the closing futures price. So here for the currency, you have the strike price, closing spot rate. For the option, the strike price and the closing futures price. Anytime a company sells future, the company buys the right to pay interest based on the strike price. Anytime a company is buying futures, the company buys the right to receive interest based on the strike price. Let's look at the simple example here. Start with XYZ intend to borrow 10 million pounds sterling. So this is the transaction amount. This is the transaction amount 10. Sorry, this is the transaction amount 10 million. Current market rate is 4%. So what is this current market rates? So it could either be LIBOR or NIBOR or whatever. But the current spot rates, the current market rate here is the opening spot rates, 4%. The loan is needed in 2 months' time and will last for 6 months. The loan will be needed in 2 months' time. So this 2 months' time is signify the transaction date. Transaction date. And it will be needed for 6 months. So this 6 months is the loan tenor. The loan tenor. Interest rate options are available in 500,000 pounds sterling. The contract size. This is the contract size. Today is 1 July. The following rates are offered. Premium are quoted in percentage. There's a strike price, 95.40. So if the strike price is 94.50, from the carry forward knowledge from your futures contracts, then the implied interest rate will be 100 minus 95.40. So what is the transaction here? What is the transaction? transaction is that the company will be borrowing. The company will borrow. Therefore, for a borrower, you always sell futures. If that is the case, that means sell to open, which means the company will pay interest to open, buy to close. The company will receive interest at the end of the contract. So the first thing is to determine the transaction. And in this question, the transaction is borrowing. So the implied interest rate, the decision is a put option. So the implied interest rate will be 100 minus 95.40. And this gives 100 minus 95.40. That will give 5. That's 4.6. 4.6. So it'll be 4.6. So the strike price is 4.6. Put option means that the company will pay interest at 4.6, which is the strike price, and receive interest at the closing futures price. So the next is how many contracts? How many contracts? The receivable amount is 10 million, and the contract size is 500,000. So 10, number of contracts. That's 10 million over 500,000 times 2. The loan tenor, the loan will be for 2 months times 2. Sorry, the loan tenor is 6 months. Sorry, the loan tenor is 6 months. So times 6 over 3. This gives 40 contracts. Therefore, the hedge amount is a perfect hedge. So the hedge amount remains at 10 million, which is the hedge amount. As it is a perfect hedge, there's no unhedged balance. So for the interest rate option, you want to determine the gain, and the gain, you look at opening and your closing. So the opening is always your strike price. The closing is always the closing futures price. In this example, the closing futures price is calculated as closing spot rate plus your unexpired basis. But in the example, let's go back to the question. This is the question here. XYZ intends to borrow 10 million. Company intends to borrow 10 million. Which is this amount. September futures on 1 September is this. The transaction date is on 1st of September. So your examiner has already given you the closing futures price, which is 93.60. So there's no need calculating the closing futures price again. So let's look at how do we calculate the profit, and do we allow the option to lapse, or the company should exercise the contract. So we already have the strike price here, which is 4.6. The closing futures price has been given in the question, so we don't have to calculate that. But if it wasn't given, it would have been closing spot rates plus unexpired basis. But in this question, we have been given the closing futures. So we just bring that in here. The closing futures was given to be 93.6. Therefore, the implied interest will be 100 minus 93.6%. That takes us to 6.4. 6.4%. So should the company exercise, or should the option be allowed to lapse? So to look at it, should the company exercise, what should be the decision? Opening futures, the company is paying interest at 4.6, and the company will close by receiving interest at 6.4. So the paying rate is less. The company will receive at 6.4, which is higher. Therefore, the company will make a gain of 1.8%. Company will make a gain of 1.8%. So what will be the effective rate based on this calculation? So effective rates. Effective rates. So that's, you want to add, if the company had not gone into the option contract, what would have been the actual rate that the company would have borrowed the fund? The company would have borrowed the fund at the rate of, let's go back to the question so that we'll see clearly what I am solving. Let's go back to the question. So here, calculate the effect of an option hedged if the interest rate moves to 6% on the closing date. So if this is the case, if the company hadn't hedged the transaction, the company will have paid interest at 6% on the closing date. So you want to check if the company is the closing interest rate. So you want to also check the question if there is a spread. If there is a spread, it will be loss the spread. But if there is none, plus 0. So look at the question. Let me read through the question one more time. XY is equal intends to borrow 10 million. Current market rate is 4%. The loan is needed in 2 months' time and will last for 6 months. Interest rate options are available in 500,000 pounds sterling contracts for 3 months. September interest future is as follows, which is this table here. Let's move up a little. So September futures, September 1, the future price is this. And interest rate is this. So there's no spread. So if the company hadn't hedged the transaction, the company will pay interest at the rate of 6% on the transaction date. Okay, so let's now look at the net. Let's look at the net outcome. Let's go back to the notes. Let's look at the net outcome. The company had not hedged the transaction. The actual interest would have been 6%. So what now the result of the hedge? So your net outcome is, we're looking at two things. There are two transactions here. Now this is the actual transaction, which is 6%. Now what is the result from the hedging? You have two things to be looking at here. The result from the hedging, one, the gain, and two, the premium. So this is a gain, and the 6% is a payable. So you now less gain. The gain will reduce your net costs. So less gain of 1.8%. 1.8. So the premium for September future is 0.198%. So adding all this will give an effective rate of 4.398%. So this is the effective rates.